Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest LinkedIn Live, where I have my lovely guest from the most recent podcast episode, which came out on Friday, which was all about values. You're very welcome, Irial O'Farrell. Welcome to the LinkedIn Live, and thank you for your time today and also for your time on the podcast. Do you want to tell people a little bit about how you kind of got into talking about this concept of values?
Yes. Hi, Aoife. How are you? And hi, LinkedIn. I suppose I fell into financial services and management and was just always fascinated with kind of how do you match the needs of the individual with the needs of performance. And so as a result of that, I ended up in running a training function for a financial services company. And training is brilliant for knowledge and skills. But then there's the what blocks people. And so people will walk out, absolutely, I'll be doing that now tomorrow. And they put the folder up on the shelf to gather a lot of dust. Yeah. So it was that kind of what blocks people. So that brought me to executive coaching. And so I did an executive coaching course in 2006. And that was that revelation of, oh my goodness, values and how important they are. So early on in the program, actually, they introduced the concept of values, and it was this huge, like, oh my, this is what it's been about.
And we've spoken before, Irial, that I had a similar revelation that I was always aware of this corporate values. It's always been this thing. And I think in any of the organizations that I have worked for in the past, it hasn't been abundantly clear how those values are being lived in the organization or what they actually mean. How do you translate them into behavior and decisions? But doing the coaching diploma that I did, it was kind of like, oh, okay, so this is what values really are. And, and I think since then, my knowledge has expanded, if you like, as to what they mean and how to go about defining them.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is that because people use the same word values, they assume that everybody's values are the same thing. But of course, they're not. Yeah. Values is just a collective term, and people's individual values are quite different. And it always amuses me when people are saying, oh, yeah, and they say they have values, but they're basically implying they don't live up to them, or, well, they don't live up to theirs, or they don't live up to yours. Which one is it?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that really was a huge eye opener for me personally. And then in my coaching, so when I did graduate in the coaching, it was always something I brought into my coaching because mainly probably for my needs, but I found it kind of had a huge impact for them as well. They were very, we would explore them and they would understand them. And what it would do is that they would find that a lot of the conflict in their life reduced, or that tension with other people. Yeah. So when I say conflict, I don't mean big conflict, but that sort of underlying kind of low level conflict where it's like, I'm not really comfortable working with this, or this person rubs me up the wrong way, that kind of conflict. And what I was finding was that they were equally getting as much benefit out of understanding their own values. They were getting a huge amount of relief of like, oh, now I understand that that's one of my values is being trampled on. I don't need to worry about that. And what I was finding was, it wasn't just me. I found it hugely revealing for me and made an awful lot of sense to me. But what I was finding was it made a lot of sense for other people as well.
Which
was
totally
where it was, where it kind of made it like, okay, there's something in this. It's not just me.
Brilliant. Maybe we take a step back a minute, and just to let you know, anyone who is listening live, feel free to add in comments and questions. This is a very interesting topic for me personally. I just love talking about values. It relates back to what I studied as part of my master's dissertation, part of what I researched as well. But Irial, maybe I love your definition of what values are, and maybe we can explore a little bit about that and say the difference between this idea of positional values and ranking your values and how to use values in your life, essentially.
Yeah. So, to me, I define values of what's really important for me, and that's worthwhile putting more effort into, and putting that I expect myself, but often importantly, it's that I expect myself and others.
And
that's often how we define
key. This is the key. I think probably the eye-opening moment is that if you expect that of yourself, you kind of assume that other people are similar to yourself and that they will behave in the same way. So if someone, like, I'll give an example of something that bothers me. If someone says, I'll do something, and then they don't do it, that really, really bothers me a lot. because if I say I'm going to do something, I will do it. You know, I absolutely will do it. So yeah, I would put that expectation on someone else, let's say, but they wouldn't necessarily have that same expectation of themselves or of me even. So what might cause, let's say, an underlying sense of frustration and conflict for me, they might just have no idea that that impact has even occurred.
Yeah, and that's where you get a lot of the tension and that low-level conflict.
Yeah.
Because if I have an expectation that I and others live up to my value, that then leads me to having expectations of other people. And when they fail to live up to that because it's not important to them, then I get irritated because my expectation wasn't met. So my expectation wasn't met, so therefore I'm irritated with them. And this whole thing is just so fascinating.
Yeah, no, it really is.
It leads to all sorts.
Yeah, because I know in some of our previous conversations, Irial, we were kind of talking about, and I've heard you speaking on other podcasts as well about this idea that the revelation you had was kind of like, oh, that's a values thing. Okay, now I understand it, and the conflict goes away. Whereas for me, I was coming at it from the perspective that goes against my values. I need to leave.
Yes. And you can see, and to be honest, I think years ago I probably would have done the same. But because I could now see, actually, you know, if we all have equal needs, but they're different. So I can't, you know, that it kind of says, well, you have to meet my values. There's an assumption there. Well, if I have these values and you're not living with them, I can't have anything to do with you. And you're going to narrow, I suppose. The learning is we will narrow our world quite considerably if we take that approach, which some people do. You know, and I, in the past, I would have said, yeah, I'd have done that. Definitely, I would have been very black and white, and I would have been. And people who know me back in the day are going, God, you're an awful lot grayer now. You know, so because I've had these learns, it's like, okay, well, I have these expectations of them, but they equally have their expectations of me that I live to their values. And so, you know, sometimes there's value clashes that you're going to go, do you know what? These are too far apart. We just need to not be in each other, you know, not kind of connect. But there, you know, so long as there's enough overlap, enough connection, enough, you know, it's kind of saying, okay, well, we're all human and you don't meet mine, but that's okay. If I know that about you, I don't have to get upset. I don't have to have that expectation, and therefore my expectation won't upset me. So that's it. So we can find a way forward, you know. You know, if they're really conflicting, you're kind of going, okay, do you know what? No, this is a boundary thing on my value. You know, this is where this is where ranking of values becomes important. You know, you might have 5 values that are, you might have five values that are important to you, but which one's the most important? Like, which one would you, you know, which order would you say? Well, okay, that's fine, but this one's more important. So as long as that one's okay, you know, we can kind of find a way forward. And so the importance of which ones are most important to which ones are least important. And then some people talk about core values versus secondary, you know, that there's like, well, I like, you know, these 2, 3 are core to me, but then there's these other 3 or 4 that are important, but not as important. So that's an example of ranking, but I would go further, particularly not necessarily on the personal basis, but on the corporate basis, on company values. I would definitely say, organizations need to say, these are the order in which we would rank these, because when decisions are required whereby we are making decisions and we are ranking our values, if we rank them in different ways, we will become inconsistent, or we will send out different messages, or we will you know, and that sends out, people start going, well, why are you ranking them like that this time? Or why are you making that decision this time? Because it doesn't seem to fit with the other decision you made.
It's inconsistent with what you've done previously. Yeah, absolutely. We have a question coming in from Jason there, and he's saying, any thoughts on the link between personality traits and values? Now, I have thoughts on this, but if you want to take it.
There's an interesting thing, because there's a whole load of different to me, I layer them. There's a whole load of layering. So there's personality preferences, and then there's emotional intelligence, which has nothing to do with your personality preferences. Well, you know, there may be some links. So and then there's kind of personal values, and so there's sort of these different layerings that happen. I mean, there's some things like you know, if you've, in terms of, I mean, there's loads of different personality process or profiles as well. But if you take, say, the agreeability, for example, if you've If you're low on agreeability, then things like if you have a value of honesty, you will just a driving value of honesty. So if you have a driving value of honesty and you're low on agreeableness, you're very likely to just say things as you see them. And you're also possibly into the black and white piece or whatever. That's a personality
that
thing.
Will definitely rub people up the wrong way. If you're a little bit too, if you lack a bit of tact or whatever. And then if you layer that in with emotional intelligence, if you're low on if you're high in independence and low on high on assertiveness, you may also be very prone to kind of say your piece or whatever, regardless of what other people say. So you can kind of see how these all start linking. There's elements that definitely link through. I mean, for me, I would say that they're completely separate things. So like your personality does not determine your values, but exactly as you've said, Irial, that the way that they interact with each other will have an impact on how you come across as a person. So the values that you hold as your core values, coupled with your personality traits, can kind of show who you are. Or like for me, your core values are more the internal drivers. I think you use that term, like being a driving value. But your personality is different to that. It's not kind of what drives you. It's more how you behave or how you interact with other people. One I would say is there's absolutely, I think they are separate, but I think they layer on top of each other and interconnect. The sort of but another one where I think that there's probably, again, the way they show up is that one around perfection and control. So somebody who's got a very controlling personality, they're often, like when people are very, they're talking about control and that kind of stuff, I often probe, is perfection a value of yours? And what you often find is that, yes, they do have a value of perfection. So again, there's, but I wouldn't say that about every value. There are certain values where I'd say, there's sort of, they can connect in some shape. There's a link between running through a lot of things about the person or whatever. And we did cover on the podcast itself the kind of the far side of values, if you like, when they can be taken to the extreme. And I think perfection might be an example of that. And I know certainly I would call myself a recovering perfectionist. I used to berate myself at any of the smallest little mistakes and, get 97% in a test. And my mom would even say this as well, as like, what happened to the other, as in she knows that I would say this of myself, as opposed to her saying this to me, that like, what happened to the other 3%, like, rather than saying, wow, 97%, that's incredible. It was more like, and the other 3%, and what happened, and where did it all go wrong? And it's an interesting concept. Jason, hopefully that answers the question that you had. We do cover a lot more on the full podcast itself. We talk about things like how to hold people to account. So, it's one thing to say that these are the values and this is how we behave and this is how we expect people to carry out their work. But then it's kind of going beyond that, is how do you make sure that actually happens? A really, really great question that Irial had in the on the podcast was, what's the business impact of this? So just asking yourself, what is the business impact? One thing that we didn't talk about actually was how to actually come up with your values. So we didn't get to cover that on the podcast. I did share in the summary some of the notes from your really, really great book. I mean, that book just resonated with me so much. It ties in with so much of the work that I do. I just loved it. So maybe we talk a little bit now about how, if people are aware that values are really, really important. For me, it's really crucial at that attraction and recruitment stage. And we do touch on that in the podcast. So values are important. We get the right people who have similar values. Taking a step back from that, how do we actually figure out what the values should be to begin with?
And in terms of one's personal values, and as you say in the book, I do go into a lot of detail as to how would you uncover your values. For me, when I was doing the course, for me, the approach we used was, you think of a time when there was a conflict between you and somebody else. and uncover what exactly is it that's upsetting you about that, because that's oftentimes when we end up in those emotionally upset situations, it's often that our values are being trampled on. Not 100%, but a lot of the time it's because our values are being trampled on. And so that's how I started doing it. And so I would, what about that situation? So if I was coaching somebody, it would be like, what about that? What about that is upsetting you? And what assumptions do you have on it? You kind of unravel what the values are. However, I will say that not everybody likes identifying their values that way. The first time somebody turned around,
my values that way.
For the first time, I was coaching somebody, and they were kind of like, "Yeah, this doesn't feel right to me." And I was like, "Oh my God, what? Okay." I was like, "Well, look at things that you like doing a lot of time, like putting a lot of effort into, because that's the positive way, the positive route, if you like." Which is probably not the right way to phrase it, but it is, well, what do you go over? What actions or what things are so important to you that you will go over and above and put in extra effort to make sure that you do that? And so that's another way of approaching it.
Yeah. Interestingly, there was someone called something out to me just this past week that I kind of knew, but I hadn't made the direct connection, let's say. And I think putting a lot of things together, I was like, had a bit of an aha moment. People always say about me, you're very productive, you're very efficient with how you do stuff, with how you use your time, all of that kind of thing. And someone sent me a message. We were due to connect, and let's have a catch-up call. And she proposed Zoom, and I was like, well, we're on Messenger, why don't we just have a chat here? And she wrote back, I love your efficiency. And I was like, okay, that's not the first time I've heard that this week. So something's going on here. And I thought about it in reference to your definition of like using extra time and extra energy to be efficient. And I do, I will go out of my way to make things simple for other people, to make things a little bit more streamlined, whether that's having systems in place, all of that kind of thing. And it never occurred to me that it was one of my core values, but maybe it is. Yeah. So therefore, I've learned something new about myself.
The question you should ask yourself is, if people are quite inefficient, does that really start rubbing you up the wrong way?
Oh yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, it really does actually. Now that you say that, yeah. Oh yeah. I could probably have another podcast episode about that. No, we won't. And like being wasteful and things like that as well, anyway, Irial, lovely chatting with you today. We cover way more on the podcast. If anyone is listening, the link to the full podcast episode is in the comments already. If you haven't listened to it, do check it out. The episode is over an hour long, and we just go into so much depth about so many different things. We probably could have spoken all day about this concept of values. For me, it's one of the fundamental parts of being in business. I think it's really, really crucially important. And I would love for everyone to check out that episode. Irial, any kind of parting final words to share?
No, thank you very much, Aoife. It was a pleasure talking to you on the podcast and again today. If you are interested in listening to the podcast, absolutely. And if you're interested further, there is even more things in the book.
Yes.
I really could talk about this for hours. The book is Values Not Just for the Office Wall Plaque, how personal and company values intersect. I also have a book out, Smart Objective Setting for Managers. If objective setting season is on your radar. And I have my new book coming out in September, which is The Manager's Dilemma, How to Empower Your Team's Problem Solving.
Yeah. I read Smart Objective Setting as well. Loved it. Probably not directly relevant to me at the moment, because I don't have a team yet. I'm not managing anyone, but I mean, just so clear about what, all of these different things. And it draws upon this element of values as well. It's not just about the what, it's about the how, and how to turn those value-based objectives into actually solid objectives and being able to measure them in an effective way. I'm really looking forward to this new book as well, because I think it is something that's really important. And I know, in my previous corporate life where I was a manager, and people are coming to you and they're escalating problems before they're even solving them, and how much time that wastes. If you can educate people on how to solve their own problems, then I think it'll make a huge difference in business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of an interesting book because where the other two are quite straightforward, as in there was a very specific topic. This concept is really nuanced because it's around the escalation, it's around problem solving, it's around coaching, it's around developing people. So there's a lot in it. But I hope I've got it clearly explained though to people.
Yeah,
so
brilliant.
I'm looking forward to that coming out.
Great. So, coming out in September. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Brilliant. Only a couple of more months.
I know. It'll fly.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for your time today, Irial, and for your time on the podcast as well. It was such a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you very much, Aoife. Pleasure as always talking to you.